make a video on a topic that I saw on a video on a Pro Box. I was watching a Pro Box TV video, and Dan Rafael brought up the the topic was, can Dana White take over boxing? And he mentioned how important the belts are. He mentioned, I don't want to misquote him, he said he's met tons of young fighters that all their dream has been to be the WBC champion. And then he said he's met tons of Puerto Rican young fighters that all their dream is to become the WBO champion. What do you guys think? Do you think a young fighter, an amateur fighter, 14, 15, 16 years old, looks at a certain belt, depending on what part of the world he lives in, and says, I want the green belt, I want the black belt, I want that burgundy belt, the WBA, I believe, WBO being black, the WBC being green, or the IBF being red? Does a young fighter, an amateur fighter, already know the difference between those four different sanctioning bodies? I don't know. I've been kind of into boxing my whole life. I've kind of been a little bit more into it the last 10 years. And I'm still guessing which one is what color. You know, I know the WBC is green. Can't get that one wrong. I know the IBF is a bright red, right? The WBA and the WBO, which one's black and which one's burgundy? I'm assuming the WBA is the burgundy one. Yes, Mauricio Suleiman is the owner of his nonprofit. He runs it out of Mexico. I happen to live in Southern California, so I see that he hosts through other people amateur tournaments here in El Monte or in Compton or in the Los Angeles area, wherever it may be. I think Robert Garcia opened up a new gym on March 8th. He moved his gym from Riverside to Moreno Valley. And I knew most of the champions on the walls. I knew, you know, they had most of those pictures. They had most of those pictures in the old gym. There was two fighters that were not up there. Jesus Cuellar, which ended up leaving on bad terms with Robert Garcia. Pretty much didn't even give Robert notice when he left. But I guess he was a little bit disgruntled with the amount of rounds he was getting of mitts with Robert, or what time of the day he was getting mitts. So there was kind of like a fallout, and then Robert actually started training Abner Mares, and Mares ended up beating Cuellar for the belt. So there's a little bad blood there. Nonetheless, Jesus Cuellar, he's Argentinian, became champion with Robert. So he's in the gym, he's on the wall, on the new gym in Moreno Valley. And so is Marco Rubio. You know, and Marco Rubio was a WBC champion middleweight, had 4 or 5 fights with Robert. I was trying to look up the history between RGBA and Marco Rubio. And, you know, when Robert was champion in 1998, you know, he had the IBF belt, you know. I'm trying to think of Fernando Vargas right now. Do I remember what belt he became champion with? I don't know. I just know that he's the youngest middleweight champion at 22 years old. I'm trying to think of belts of Bam Rodriguez. When Bam beat Cuadras, what belt did he win? I don't know. Was it the WBC, the WBO, the WBA, the IBF? I'm assuming it was the WBC. He won it at 115. He was such a threat. It sounded like nobody else wanted to sign up. He couldn't get fights. He was signed to Matchroom. But the people with the belts at the time, there's a lot of factors behind it. One of them being Chocolatito, being in the same promotional as him. So he moved back down to 112 and went for a belt there. Which one? Probably the WBC. If I'm thinking of the pictures, I kind of remember a green one being there. Then he unified for another belt. Which one? I don't know. You know? Rayo Valenzuela just recently became champion. What belt did he win? I'm assuming it's the burgundy one, which means it's the WBA, right? He just lost it to Gary Russell. Virgil Ortiz just went to Saudi, got a WBC belt from his fighting Bohachuk, defended it versus Madrimov. It's an interim. What does the word interim mean in terms? Is there a full-fledged champion at the WBC at 154 other than Virgil? So, you know, I'm just curious. I'm curious to the statement that Dan Rafael said, that a lot of kids that he's ran into, a lot of amateur fighters that he's ran into have these dreams to become champion. Now, he doubled down and said they want the green belt, or they want the burgundy belt, or they want the WBO. He said the WBO, which is the black, which when you see it, it's black. The belt is black, the middle's gold or whatever, the symbol, but the belt is black. I'm talking about the belt part. You know, the belt's green for the WBC. For the WBA, it's burgundy. For the IBF, it's bright red, like a different shade of red than difference from the WBA. And I'm just curious that if you're an amateur fighter, you dream of being world champion, interim champion, international champion. You know, we came up with a huge issue a few years ago where Lomachenko had a certain title, and people were questioning whether it was undisputed. You know, and some of these sanctioning bodies got questioned by the media and by reporters and by, you know, people with YouTube channels that don't consider themselves reporters or journalists, you know, but nonetheless, you can buy your ticket and run into Mauricio Suleiman and ask him, hey, is this belt transferable? And, you know, unfortunately or fortunately, sometimes you can see through the smoke. And that's just my question. I'm curious, you know, even to this day, I don't know the difference between certain belts. The WBC is the most in terms of being out there. I think the WBC is out there the most. So, you know, you know, there's a WBC youth title. That's the one Hector Tanajara went when he won it in Tijuana in 2019. You know, there's somebody just recently won the I wish I knew it off the top of my head. And doing my research yesterday, I ran into it, and it was the WBC Continental Americas belt, which is the WBC. And it's just, I don't know, when you're young and when you're an amateur and your parents are paying huge amount of fees for you to enter a tournament, and then you're paying room and board and food to travel to where they have these national tournaments in Mississippi, in Missouri. You know, if you can make it to nationals, if you can make it to the Junior Olympics, you know, if you're here locally, I live in San Diego, so if you're gonna go to a tournament, most likely you're gonna travel to Oxnard, you know, for the PALs, or you're gonna go to Compton. You gotta drive all the way to Compton. You're gonna spend time in gas and sometimes a hotel, maybe not a hotel, maybe you skip out on the hotel if it's a one-day tournament. But at a very young age, you know, boxing can be just like baseball, basketball, football, hockey, you know, you name it. The equipment is super expensive. The training is expensive. The travel is expensive. You know, can you as a parent be jarred? Can you already, if you continue to be in the sport of boxing and your son or daughter turn 18 and they decide to go pro, and you've already been going to all these tournaments, you know, is one belt going to mean more to you than another? Is your dream for your child to be the WBC champion, or is it just your dream for your child to be champion, and it doesn't matter what belt it is out of the four, right? World champion is world champion, right? Right. What do you think? Do you think there's a difference between a world champion and a international champion belt title holder? Dana White is coming in and saying, I want to return all the weight classes back to how they originally were, which means no junior and, if it's middleweight, there's no junior middleweight and there's no super middleweight. He just wants 160. So there's going to be no junior middleweight of 154 and there's going to be no super middleweight of 168. So we're going to eliminate all the juniors and all the supers, and I want one belt for all divisions. Does that crush a lot of amateurs' dreams? You tell me in the comments. It's a super interesting question. I saw it in a video, I think yesterday, on ProBox TV, and I was listening to Dan Rafael. And Dan Rafael is a reporter. He's been around a long time. Did he just make his personal experience in talking to amateur fighters, did he make that a generalization? Or, in your opinion, does a certain belt mean more to you? Does the WBC belt mean more than the IBF to you? Does the WBO belt mean more than the WBA? Or is a championship title belt a championship title belt? Is the WBC interim title worth more than the International Americas title? And is the International Americas title mean more than the youth title? And is the youth title equivalent to the world title? You tell me, I started helping out a gym owner here in Vista locally a few years ago, and I learned a little bit about the fees that go into taking a amateur fighter to a tournament, and taking the cost of having to do this: plane flights, hotel costs, food, travel, all that, the enrollment fee into these junior Olympics or nationals, whatever tournament you're competing at. So it can be a very lucrative business, USA Boxing, and it was something. When Dan Rafael said it, as soon as he said it, I said, there's levels of, I don't like to use the word casuals. I know that's a word that gets thrown a lot around in the YouTube world, but can a hardcore fight, me being a hardcore boxing fan, if I can't tell you the difference between certain belts, sanctioning bodies, and certain levels, what do you think somebody who watches just as much boxing as they do basketball, hockey, what if their time is divided equally? What if they love three sports, boxing being one, baseball being another, and basketball being the last one, and still dabble in football and hockey every once in a while, and soccer? Do you think they're gonna know the difference between the green belt, the black belt, the burgundy belt, and the bright red belt? Are they going to know the difference between the WBC, the WBO, the WBA, and the IBF? Or are you just going to see a boxing match and say, hey, that guy's wearing the winner got the belt, he's the champion, and he's wearing a belt around his waist? Well, guess what? There's all kinds of belts. If you think about it that way, then almost every card has a champion. Everybody's wearing a belt. Some level of, maybe not the world title belt, but it's still green, it's still black, it's still burgundy, and it's still bright red, and it's still around their waist. So you tell me if you think you support what Dana White is doing, getting rid of all the junior and super divisions, and making one belt for all of them. And tell me what you think about Gilberto Mendoza. Tell me what you think of Mauricio Sulaimán. Do you think they're going to just go along with the propositions that Dana's putting forth? You tell me.